We're here with John. We're going to ask him about the Holocaust.
Hi, Shane.
Okay, so when do you first recall hearing about the Holocaust?
Probably, I don't know, not in grade school, but maybe junior high kind of thing. You know, 7th, 8th grade.
Okay.
It was part of the history that we took at the time, which wasn't extensive. You know, later on, you find out more about these things.
Okay.
Because I'm 72, so I was born in 1950. The war ended in 45. Nobody found out about this stuff until they liberated the camps.
Yeah.
And then the world found out about it. But back then, you know, you didn't have cell phones.
Yeah.
There wasn't any there wasn't TV channels all over the place, CNN. That's how they pretty much got away with it.
Yeah. Okay, so what words or places come to mind when you first hear the
Well,
Holocaust?
the places that they had the camps. I got to think of that. Oh, now I got it. Auschwitz was one of them. That was the biggest one, I guess. But that's what you heard about when you saw any films about it or TV documentaries. That's what I've seen a lot of over the years since that. And it wasn't really sad. It was worse than sad. I don't know how that whole families were killed.
Yeah.
For just being Jewish.
Yeah.
Just being a certain race of people.
Yeah. Okay, so how was it taught to you in school?
Well, like I said, when I was in school, we had history books, and there was chapters of it in the history books, but it wasn't like we watched a lot of documentaries of it. We didn't have that kind of stuff. We didn't have a lot of extra stuff. It was either the TV at home or books in school.
All right. So how important, in your opinion, is it to education?
Well, if you forget about history, you're going to live it again in some other form of that kind of extensive killing of people. Just like I said, just because they were Jewish.
Yeah.
Just because they're an ethnic group.
Okay, so have you ever seen a film on the Holocaust? And if you have, then describe it.
Well, there are many of them, films and then, like I said, actual footage. Once they were liberated by the Allies, that's when it really got out. Because up until then, they kept that quiet. Nobody knew about that. They were shocked when they first saw it. Yeah. And I myself too, when seeing, things on TV, about the Holocaust, it shocks you to see these people. It was awful.
All right, that's a wrap. Thank you, John.
Okay, Shane.
All right. When did you first become aware of the Holocaust?
Probably, Austin, not until maybe 10 or 15 years actually after the war, when it was really brought out. We had, being only 9 years old when the war ended and when the Holocaust was uncovered. But we had no idea what the Holocaust was. We had a little indication of something that was going on, but we could not define it. It wasn't until I'm going to say 8 or 9 years after the war that we realized what had happened.
Okay, thank you. What comes to mind when you hear the word Holocaust, places or words?
Very tragic and very sad and unforgiving.
Sorry. How was the Holocaust taught to you in school?
Actually, Austin, it was not taught to us in school. It was never brought up in the history. One reason being that the war was really too recent to become part of a curriculum in a study. It was not, it probably wasn't 20 or 30 years after the war ended that the full impact of the Holocaust really came out.
How would you elevate the learning about the Holocaust in school, and what would you add? Anything specific to the curriculum
Well,
that you
since there
don't
was
know?
since there was no curriculum or study on the Holocaust, I really can't. I can only say that people have to be aware of it, and hopefully that it does not happen again. Unfortunately, we're seeing a similar situation now in Ukraine, which is almost a repeat, but not on the scale that the World War II Holocaust came about.
Yes. What are some of your favorite films about the Holocaust?
Schindler's List is the primary film. I can't remember any other films that I've actually seen about it. It is not a widely publicized event on film. Maybe more in Europe. Maybe there are films within the Jewish community that have films on it, but it's nothing that appears on TV on a regular basis. There, okay, yeah, that's it on that also. Yeah. Many years ago, we visited a museum in Washington, D.C. about the Holocaust, and that was really an eye-opener. It is sort of mind-boggling of what those people did. I'm going to go back and say yes, I did see one film on the Holocaust. It was a number of years ago, and it was very graphic, and I can't remember the name of the film, but it was very graphic. It was about an uprising in one of the concentration camps where the prisoners organized a revolt. They were not successful, and many suffered for doing it. A lot of things, Austin, that I can remember about World War II on a personal level, on our day-to-day life, was the one that comes to mind first and foremost is the rationing. During the war effort, everything out there was rationed to support the war effort. Gasoline, tires, food, clothing, etc. And there were ration stamps. And I don't know how the mechanics, how it worked, but if you had a stamp and it was worth maybe a gallon of gasoline, and when you went to get gasoline for your car, you handed them a book, and they actually put in the amount of gas that the limit that you could get. People carpooled to go shopping, especially into Springfield, so that not more than one car was necessary to take maybe 3 people. All sorts of things like that. Sugar was very hard to come by during the war. Good meat was hard to come by. I can remember things like that. Yeah. What else did I have? Oh yeah, there were paper drives. There were metal drives. The guys would drive up and down the street, and if you had a pot or a pan that you could spare, you would hand it over, and they would tell you if you wanted to get your comic books, turn in your old comic books today. You could still get you could get a newspaper. You could still get comic books, but they suggested that when you were done with them, turn them in so they could get recycled and get them back again. Also, where you live, your driveway went all the way down to the mill over here. And I can remember the mills working and the big loads of raw wool that came on flatbed tractors, because that was the only way they could get into the mill. And we'd hear sometimes all night long, we'd hear the clang of the machinery lifting the bales off those trucks, because they stored the wool down in that mill, during the war until they were ready to take it up and process it, and they moved those in smaller trucks. So that's a little interesting point for you right there. And also in the mills worked, I don't know if they worked 2 or 3 shifts, 2 shifts anyway. And we would hear on a hot summer's night, we could hear that machinery clacking away all night long. So everybody was working. Women went to work because the men had to go fight in the war and whatnot. So we were fortunate. My parents, my father was not called. He was too old really for the draft, even though he had a draft card, and I think that I still have his draft card somewhere.
Wow.
Another thing that happened during the war was we had air raids in town, air raid blackouts, and each section of town, every few streets, had its own warden who made sure when there was a siren that went off about 9 o'clock at night, and you had to turn your lights off and you had to pull your shades down. And so if there were enemy planes that were going to go over, they could not see the lights down below. And that happened frequently during the war. Yep. Let's see, what else did I ask? We spent a lot of time at my grandparents' place because of the rationing of gas. You couldn't go anywhere. So the families used to gather weekends, and that was their entertainment, so to speak. Yeah. And I remember vividly the end of the war, both wars, both the war in Europe and the war in Japan. The war in Europe ended, I think, in May. They don't even put that on the calendar anymore. They called it VE Day. And all of it was late in the afternoon, and the word came out that the war in Europe was over, and the fire alarm blew, and people just poured out of their houses and formed impromptu parades, banging pots and pans and singing and yelling. It was quite the sight. And then in August of that year, when Japan surrendered, the same thing happened. So that was quite an event. Yep. Early on, and this is just a comment it was actually after the war that we learned this. Early on in the war, when Hitler started to exterminate the Jewish people, some convicts and prisoners escaped from the concentration camps, and they made their way to freedom, and eventually to the United States. I think it was the United States. I'm not positive. And they told the powers to be in the United States of what Hitler was doing to the Jewish population in Europe, and nobody believed them. Even President Roosevelt supposedly made the comment, no human being would do that to another human being. So early on in the war, they were aware of it, but it wasn't until after when they started closing in on the final days of the war that they started liberating. They came across these concentration camps, and when they found these horrible conditions, that they realized that these people were right. Yeah. Occasionally, we would see flights of airplanes flying right over Munson as they were heading northeast to Europe. And there would be hundreds and hundreds of planes flying. Sometimes it took maybe an hour to pass by. But this is the route many of them took to go to Europe. They would fly up to, I don't know whether they stopped in Maine, then Newfoundland, and possibly because they were propeller different planes and they weren't jets, and they had to refuel a little bit more often before going to England, and from England that's when they then went to Europe. So